All right, you guys ready?
Let's rock.
Yes, sir.
Founded in 1966, Five Star for generations was known to basketball insiders and people involved with the game as one of the showcases for outstanding players of the future. Over the years, many of the greats have come through Super Garf's doors. Names like Michael Jordan, Isiah Thomas, Christian Laettner, Grant Hill, LeBron James, and on and on. They have also worn the famed orange five-star shirts and shorts. Today we look back at some of that history, but also dive into the bright present to talk about the new stocking stuffer Bookazine and five-star gear, perfect for completing holiday gift giving. Now, on to the show.
Jim, isn't it amazing when Michigan can keep this game to a 19-foot 9-inch game inside that three-point line? It's all there. By Steve Fisher here. Turn it into the 19-9 game.
Welcome to the 99 podcast. I'm your host, Josh Barnett, and I'm here with my co-host, Aaron Meyer. And today we are joined by three special guests to take us on a trip down five-star basketball camp memory lane. Today we have Danois, who essentially wrote the entire five-star magazine, and is also the author of The Boys of Dunbar, which was made into a 30 for 30 by ESPN. And from the five-star side of things, we have Karl Blum and Peter Robert Casey. Guys, we super appreciate you guys sitting down with us today and getting to talk a little basketball nostalgia. So welcome to the 99 podcast.
Thank you. The honor's ours.
Glad to be here.
So PRC, since you stepped up and spoke first, I'm going to kick it to you first. Can you tell us a little bit about how the magazine came to be and how this project got from idea to completion in this bookazine, this coffee table bookazine that I have in front of me right now?
Yeah, I'll actually rewind it back. I was a little disappointed my name wasn't dropped amongst all those famous alumni that came to the camp.
Hey, we're gonna get to that. We're gonna get to that.
Camp memories.
In sincerity, in full sincerity, I went to the camp and I played in the NIT division, which was like the middle of the pack, the kids that weren't going anywhere in the basketball careers. And I was a first and third quarter player, which means I wasn't a closer. And so I knew my career was over. But fast forward, that was in the late 90s. Fast forward 5 years ago, we got 14,000 photos, when we acquired the business. Howard Garfinkel, the co-founder of Five Star Basketball Camp, was a photographer, an aficionado, always had a camera around his neck and was always taking photos. So we inherited 14,000 photos, which we digitized. And while I was going through those, literally one by one, I went down memory lane and I said, this someday has to become a coffee table book, right?
Yes.
And so fast forward a couple of years after that, we acquired Slam, the legendary magazine that we're, re-energizing and modernizing. And Slam is a publisher. And I said, now is the opportune time to bring that five-star, think about a coffee table magazine, which is where it became the Bookazine, if you will, as you guys called it. So there was one writer who I was friends with since, literally 2009. We used to write together at Bounce Magazine, a streetball publication that's no longer with us. Ali, I've been a huge fan of his writing. I knew he brought full flavor to the mix. He knew the five-star history and legacy. And we had already gone down a path once upon a time of thinking about Five Star as a documentary too. And what we quickly learned is that there's not a lot of rich archival video footage, but we had a lot of photos. So the best version of this story, in our opinion, was, maybe doing a podcast narrative, which is coming, but more fittingly, more recently, is to bring this to life in a bookazine. So Ali came to the table, and Karl, my colleague over on the Five Star side, really did a lot of the legwork. Credit to him, and like putting the structure of this thing together and bringing it to reality.
I love it. I wanted to throw it to Karl next, actually, because I just got done talking about and reading the 96 Slam draft and loved that. And there's a story in there about the cover. So I wanted to ask Karl, like, how he started to put together the cover, whoever contributed to the cover and the pictures that are on there. Because, it makes an impact when you see it sitting on a table, the guys that are on there, and it just starts to peel away those layers of history.
The layout is super dope too, Karl. Cool. You killed it.
Yeah, I can't take I can't take too much credit on the layout.
You can on this show. Nobody's listening to it.
We have great design guys. A lot of help from Slam putting that all together. But I think when you look at the rich history of 5-star, you go in the photo archive, it's like, where do you begin? There's just so much in there. So many great names, so many all-time greats. So when you're putting together the cover, you're like, how do we encompass all that? What's the accurate snapshot of that? So of course, we wanted to get the big flashy names, Michael Jordan, the coaches, the players and coaches, because it was both things. It was players and coaches coming together, being a part of something historic. And we wanted to make sure that the cover got your attention right away and let you know that this was a really special place for basketball.
Yeah, that's dope. So I was gonna throw it because when we talk about 5-star and we get into the magazine, it starts with Garf, right? Who's already been mentioned several times. And Ali, this question's for you. When you were when I was reading the story about that, you mentioned that you spoke to Garf a lot, and I don't want to give away like the whole story that you guys wrote in the magazines because I want people to buy this thing and read it for themselves. But I was curious as I was reading through that article, what is one of your favorite Garf stories that you guys talked about leading up to this?
I don't know. It's really difficult to pinpoint one favorite Garf story. He was just such a fascinating character, right? He was almost this caricature that was pulled out of a Woody Allen movie who's operated his office out of a booth at the Carnegie Deli. And you could actually write a movie about Garf and end it prior to him forming 5-star. And it would just be a fascinating look at New York, at college basketball in the 1950s and 1960s. He was just a remarkable person. He was born into wealth. He abhorred the thought of inheriting the largest textile center and business operation in the country. His life was laid out comfortably before him. But he was a sports junkie. He had paid his unofficial internships at the old Madison Square Garden on 50th Street and 8th Avenue, being a part of those legendary doubleheaders and just being a part of a really wacky and bizarre group of characters who regularly attended those games and got together in the lobby to argue and fight and debate and talk about basketball. But the fascinating thing, I think, about Garf is maybe not so much one individual story, although I will kind of share one of my favorites, is just that, here was a man who gave no hint that he would be one of the architects that built and elevated the game of basketball in the late 20th century, right? He's one of the game's late 20th century architects. He was a giant in the development of the game. Through his love and vision and drive, left an everlasting impact on high school, college, and the pro games, right? The ripples of his essence are still being felt and disseminated to this very day, right? If you just looked at this year's conference finals in the bubble, on the TV side, you had the wonderful dynamic duo of Mark Jackson and Jeff Van Gundy, both 5-star alums. The coach of the Denver Nuggets, Mr. Malone, was a 5-star alum as a coach. And there were numerous players in those conference finals, of course, the biggest and the baddest being LeBron James, being a 5-star alumnus. So his fingerprints and what he created are still impacting people today. So for people that love basketball and watch basketball and just get a thrill out of seeing Kevin Durant and Steph Curry and all of the great players, not just of today, but who are fans of the history of the game and going back to, just the talent that flowed into the NBA in the late 60s all the way through today, you really get a full understanding, and that's what that story kind of touches on in terms of Garf starting his own AAU team, volunteering as a coach at the YMCA, hustling to get sponsors for his teams and his programs, kind of starting to understand that what it meant to have talent, being recognized by college coaches who thought that he could help them in identifying players, because obviously back then the recruiting budgets were minimal. So those coaches kind of depended on people in certain kind of hot spots and cities to kind of help them look at, what kids might make an impact and be a good fit for their programs. And Garf was a point person kind of in that pipeline that sent a lot of great New York City players to various schools around the country. Probably one of my favorite Garf stories is just his interaction with Bob Wade, the coach of the legendary Dunbar High School Poets, in the early 1980s. Bob Wade brings an amazing assemblage of talent up to five-star, the summer of 1982, I want to say. And, Garf is just excited to have him. Wade has been a fixture at five-star as one of the teachers and lecturers, and just brought an incredible amount of talent over the years. And that year, the number one player in the country was a guy by the name of Reggie Williams, who would go on to be the MVP of the 1984 national championship game as a freshman for Georgetown University. And he had a bunch of other just unbelievably long-limbed, talented players. And the shortest guy to climb out of that van was a 5'3" point guard that wasn't known outside of Baltimore by the name of Tyrone Bogues, whose nickname was Muggsy, which was required on the playgrounds of Baltimore because they said that every time he stole the ball from an opponent when he was a little kid, it seemed like he was mugging them.
Yeah.
Right? And so Garfinkel, this camp had probably 8 to 10 big-time point guard recruits who were nationally known, who were already on the national radar. But outside of Baltimore, no one knew who Muggsy was. So in the draft, Wade was given the opportunity to pick the first point guard. Now, Pearl Washington was in that camp, the legendary Dwayne Pearl Washington, who really single-handedly elevated that Syracuse program and put 30,000 people into Carrier Dome seats, and was just truly instrumental in the building of the Big East Conference. Pearl was just one of many great point guards in that camp, including Tommy Amaker, one of the greatest defensive point guards, one of the great recruits that helped Mike Krzyzewski begin to build the infrastructure of the great Duke dynasty and all these other guys. So when Bob Wade had the chance to pick the first point guard, he chose Muggsy, and Garf became irate because he hadn't seen Muggsy yet play in a scrimmage. At this point, the guys were just doing drills and kind of various tryouts, and so he hadn't seen what Muggsy was capable of. And so he said that he was going to avoid the draft. Tempers really were raised. These guys got chest to chest. Now, mind you, Bob Wade is a former National Football League defensive back, covered the likes of Otis Taylor. He was a bear of a man.
Garf's out of his league.
And Garf was just out of his league, right? So eventually kind of they simmer down, and Wade says, look, I know what I'm doing. Not only am I taking Muggsy, but I am designating him as my horse. The TRC got clear that he was got the third quarter, but each team had one player that was designated as a horse that could play the entire game. Now, the horse was designated for people like Moses Malone and Patrick Ewing, right? These transcendent future Hall of Fame talents that just were unbelievable. And the fact that Wade said he was going to use Muggsy as his horse really threw Garf into a state of rage. Eventually, they calmed down and they made a bet. And he said, Wade, you're not going to win a single game with this guy as your point guard. And also, you don't have a really good center. And Wade said, not only am I going to win every game, but I'm going to win the championship with this kid. And long story short, Muggsy just mesmerizes, shocks and amazes to see him operate as a 5'3" revolutionary talent that could dominate a game without scoring a point. And at the end of that camp, if you read Garf's kind of 5-star summary and his HSBI report on Muggsy, not only did he give him 5 stars, but he called him the greatest peanut since Planters.
Ali, you need to write some of that stuff down. That was good. Hey, I think one of the things I wanted to hit on, though, that I was listening to you so amazing about this is that not only is it all the names that you listed and the stories that come out of it, but it's the way that those stories have spun into the actual fabric of basketball. Like the things that happened at 5-star became what basketball is on so many levels, taught in gyms all over the country. And I think that's an incredible piece of it as well.
So my question becomes to PRC, I'll throw this to you, bud. My question becomes, does Garf get his just due in your mind for everything that he brought as a basketball innovator, I would say? Does he get his just due in your mind?
So, arguably no, if you answer that net, no. However, the coaches whose lives he shaped and the jobs he helped get them, including, by the way, John Calipari, Rick Pitino, on and on, Dick Vitale when he got the Rutgers job, all credit Garf for opening that door for them, giving them the platform to teach at camp and then take that and go to the next level and vouch for them. And so, right now, what we're told, he's actually on the 2021 Naismith Hall of Fame ballot.
Oh, nice.
All these coaches, including Bob Knight, who got behind him. He's already in the New York City Basketball Hall of Fame. He's in the Upstate New York Basketball Hall of Fame, and he's in the National College Basketball Hall of Fame. But that didn't come until the very end of his life. It was long overdue when he got the college nod. So it didn't taste as sweet as it could have been because it felt like a make good. But, I don't think he gets the credit. But if you know basketball, what Ali was saying, if you went to that camp, Garf treated it as if it was a Broadway show. He was a maestro. He would give these 20-minute introductions to these these coaches who would come and lecture at the camp, making them feel like the biggest thing ever. And every second, every minute of that camp was scripted in such meticulous fashion. And he was so wound up all the time. He was a perfectionist with all the details that not only could he lure the talent and identify the talent, but he knew the production of the camp business. He always said he went to camp as a kid at Camp Mascoma up in New Hampshire, and he loved the idea of camp. And then he worked at Jack Donahue's camp called Friendship Farm, which was like a general all sports camp, but, specialized in basketball. And, being a competitive guy that he was, he says, I could do this better. And so that kind of prompted him after launching HSBI to found 5-star. And he just put every ounce of his love and affection into this. What he focused on was teaching the game the right way. And so, he doesn't get enough credit more broadly, but if you know basketball, you went to the camp, the impact that he had.
And the Hall of Fame would be a nice touch.
Yeah. Necessary
for sure.
Yeah, I think that it feels weird to leave that some people get left out when they have this big an impact over this long a time.
I gotta be honest, I just assumed he was in. I didn't.
I know. Yeah, it's like, wait, what?
Yeah, exactly.
All right, Ali, I got one for you. Who is Mike Jordan cafeteria worker?
That's another one of the great kind of 5-star stories that when PRC, we were talking about the power of this story is the Michael Jordan story, right? So most people become acquainted with this skinny freshman who hits the winning shot in the NCAA championship game against Georgetown. But the essence of Michael Jordan can be seen through the 5-star story, right? So kind of contrary to the popular opinion, Michael Jordan wasn't an entirely unknown commodity. But outside of the state of North Carolina, no one had heard of him. And it wasn't until he got to the 5-star camp, which was through one of Garf's kind of 5-star connections and an assistant coach by the name of Roy Williams, who was a limited earnings coach on Dean Smith's staff, He augmented his salary by selling calendars out of the trunk of his car.
What kind of calendars?
If you think about, I don't know, but geez, I don't know how much Roy makes now, but it's got to be a long way.
Yeah.
It's got to be a long way from making $3,000 a year.
That's
right?
a lot of calendars.
Steve Alford calendars. Remember when he got in trouble for that? I'd be down for one of those.
But it's a funny story in that Roy really had forged a really good relationship with Michael's parents. Michael came to his attention through the athletic director of the Hanover Schools District, which was the high school that he played in. And he said, "Hey, man, there's this really good kid. We think he should go to your camp at North Carolina." And, Michael goes there and he just amazes and dazzles, and Roy cannot believe just the raw energy, the competitiveness, the potential of this guy. And his high school coach, Pops Herring, says, we're thinking about sending him to Five Star and the other big camp, which was Bill Cronauer's camp, known as BC Camp back at the time. And so Roy says, well, if you're going to send him anywhere, you need to send him to Five Star because it's the premier kind of teaching institution. And Dean Smith was furious with him because at that time, no one on the national level was recruiting him. And he knew that once he got to Five Star and showed who he was, that the cat would be let out of the bag. But, long story short, Michael Jordan kind of walks in, and there's a great story in the Bookazine, and I won't go into it in terms of how he wound up being drafted by the great Tom Konchalski, but that's a really, really funny story.
People got to read that.
Because the head coach of that team that Konchalski was drafting for, had another guard that he wanted to draft, and he was furious at Konchalski because Konchalski chose Jordan. And the great quote from that was, he screamed at him when he told him, "Who the F is Mike Jordan?" After that camp, the world found out who the F Mike Jordan was.
Yeah, if you think you know everything after watching The Last Dance, you need to read this and then update your knowledge.
Without a doubt. And that's the beautiful thing about Five Star and why PRC and I were so passionate about this project, because, there are so many ripe pockets to do some incredible storytelling about the history of the game. And Jordan is just like kind of one grain of sand on this huge beach. And I don't think people really understand how Five Star impacted them personally, if they love the game, and just what it meant overall to the development of modern basketball.
So one of my favorite parts of the magazine, because I'm a like an artifacts nerd, was the picture, Karl, that you guys put in of the original camp flyer in there. And so as soon as I pulled that up on the PDFs that PRC sent me the other day, I text PRC and I said, please tell me that this is the fold out poster, because that thing was going into a frame and up on the wall down here. So I wanted to talk to you a little bit about the photography and PRC, and you guys were talking earlier about 14,000 pieces of photography that you had to sift and sort through. First of all, just how much fun is that going through there and kind of getting a history lesson in the Five Star camp? And then are there times where you can't get out of your own head on what picks to use?
So I'll start with just how cool it is to go through all these, artifacts, like you call them. I remember the day PRC and I went and we got the camp flyer that you're talking about that we featured in the magazine. And we're up in our chairman at JDS Sports, Joe Sandberg's attic, where a lot of this stuff is stored. And I remember picking some of that stuff up. And I had this experience a lot when I'm looking at the Five Star photos, where you pick it up and you feel like you're almost time traveling, where, I'm a basketball guy. I grew up in the 90s, early 2000s. I know what it's like to go to a basketball camp. I've heard a lot of basketball coaches talk. And I'm like, this is what a basketball camp looked like, just the way guys are dressed. I think I remember specifically picking up the camp flyer and looking at the price of camp and being like $100 for this week of Chuck Daly and Hubie Brown. Are you kidding me? For $100, that's a great deal. And, you realize that things were really different back in the day. I think there was like suggested clothing where it's telling you to make sure you bring your handkerchiefs. And I can't
That's amazing.
I can't imagine us writing a 5-star camp flyer right now and saying, hey, make sure everybody, comes to sleepaway camp and is bringing their handkerchiefs.
Right. And I saw like some of the photography that was chosen, I saw some of the guys were playing in like their high school football, like cut off jerseys and shit. And I'm like, how in the hell are you playing basketball?
I think it only said 3 shirts or something. I was real worried. I'm like, are they making them do laundry there?
And like I'm saying, I feel like I'm literally stepping in a portal and time traveling a little bit and seeing how different things were. But at the same time, one of the other really cool things I get to do is listen to our audio archive. So I'm looking at these photos and I'm getting that perspective. But then at the same time, I get to go listen, which is really, really putting yourself there. You get to hear the language these guys use. You get to hear what kind of lessons they're talking about in basketball and in life in general. And a lot of things that you're going to pick up and see in that camp flyer, times have clearly changed. But when you listen to some of these people speak, they were just so before their. And I wasn't around in the 60s and 70s, so were they before their time, or were these ideas that were spreading? I'm not sure, but they seem so before their time. And when you hear somebody like Coach K talk in the 70s, and you still feel the weight and the significance of everything he's saying, and his ideas are passing the test of time. And I think it's a really cool dichotomy of just seeing how different things were, but how similar some things were, and what lasted, if that makes sense.
Is there a particular audio tape that you listened to that really stood out, or is there a particular picture in the magazine that is your favorite because you think it sums up all of that stuff that you kind of just talked about with the place, time, setting type aspect?
Yeah, so there's 2 that off the top of my head audio recordings I really love. One is obviously Coach K. I'm a Duke guy, so just the fact that there was this unheard piece of history, Coach K on a Tuesday in the 70s talking basketball like that. I was a kid in a candy shop getting
Sure.
crack out
Sure.
and listening to talk. The other one, and I'm blanking right now, the head coach of Davidson, legendary guy. What's his name? I'm totally blanking right now. He
You keep talking. I'll find out.
PRC and I can't come up with it, we're in trouble.
He's from Long Island. He has white hair. Come on, I'm letting you do trivia, Josh.
Hubie?
Bob McKillop.
Bob McKillop.
There you go.
Oh, yeah.
Bob McKillop.
Disappointed.
Yeah,
I'm sorry, man. I let you down.
yeah, but Bob McKillop was one of the first maybe 3 or so audio archives that I popped open. And I didn't really know what I was going to have to discover there. And I'll tell you what, man, I got so fired up when I heard Bob McKillop speak just about personal motivation, personal growth. He's speaking to this young audience. And I'm a young guy. I'm 25. I just left college athletics. And those are lessons that I needed to hear when I was younger. And people told me the things that he was saying. And I think they helped shape, my trajectory. And I'm just listening to it thinking, wow, these kids in this audience, they are so lucky to be hearing Bob McKillop speak right now. And he spoke with energy. He spoke with enthusiasm. He was captivating. And I felt like I was there. If we ever get to release that Bob McKillop lecture, that would be something special.
Yeah, I think I listened back to one of you guys were on a different podcast and you talked about having all those audio files, and I was like, you could just do a whole series just releasing those and talking about those. It's unbelievable. I know that one of the articles is the think tank of hoops, just talking about the coaches. So I was going to come to PRC, but really, Karl or anybody could jump in on that too. Just talking about what that meant, like how the camp became that think tank. I think Ali too used some words to describe it that were incredible in the article about it too. So whoever wants to take that one first.
Well, I could I'll do a little quick preface to it. So that quote, the basketball's preeminent think tank, was actually Tom Konchowski who described it that way. But I'll set the table. Back in the first ever camp, 1966, right? It was only 6 months after the iconic Texas Western versus Kentucky game. 71 kids get off the bus from New York City, mostly of all colors and backgrounds, literally playing basketball, staying in the same bunks together. And what happened very early on was, because these kids were just starving for instruction and the desire to get better, the coaches it became contagious. They just really were competing with one another and wanting to be the best teacher of the game at the camp. So it kind of just really raised the intensity from that day one became a key part of Five Star's DNA. You can name coaches until you're blue in the face that went from the high school ranks to college and pro that worked the camp, starting as counselors, and players that went from, high school to D1 to the NBA that came to the camp.
Right.
But what made it special, the secret sauce, was the intensity. I look back at it now, over 20 years later, and, when you're a 17-year-old kid, Five Star was brutal on you, man. You'd wake up at 7 a.m. and Garf's got Sinatra music going. You don't come back into that bunk until
PRC,
about 11 o'clock at night.
Were you going to Station 13? Do you have enough energy to
No,
maintain?
I was that kid, by the way. I probably went to 3 out of the 7 Station 13s during the week. I was looking for... That's why I was a D3 player.
Yeah.
But the think tank component of Five Star was that. It was the coaches wanting to, the talent wanted to be harnessed, and the coaches wanted to disseminate their knowledge that they had. And they saw it ultimately became a platform. Like I said, they knew that Garf had a lot of leverage and a lot of relationships with, head coaches at the D1 level. So, your Five Star when you're teaching the game at Five Star, you're also auditioning for your future job at all these different places. And college coaches, by the way, as you know, were coming there to recruit talent. So they could see you. They'd watch stations. They'd watch the players. They want to see how they react to teaching, right? Are they too cool for school to high five and lean into wanting to learn? So, the list of coaches that worked the camp or lectured the camp or just came to listen, like Ali said, Mike Malone came to camp initially and he worked the canteen where they sold candy bars and T-shirts. It was just like an all access pass to absorb and through osmosis being around this, all this future Hall of Fame coaching talent. So it really is a think tank. I'll pass it to Ali to add some more context and flavor.
That's great.
No, I think that's one of the things that this is going to really help people digest, right? Because when we think of Five Star, we think of the Jordan story, we think of all of this great talent. But I think one of the things that we really wanted to get across was the teaching aspect of it. And I think that's just encapsulated by the fact that when this camp started in 1966, Howard Garfinkel reached out to a guy by the name of Robert Montgomery Knight, who was the coach at the U.S. Military Academy. And, Army had no business beating some of the teams that they were beating and some of these legendary college basketball doubleheaders at Madison Square Garden. And he approached Bob Knight before he became Bob Knight, before he won national championships at Indiana, before he had ascended to this level of being considered one of the greatest coaches of all time, and made him the director of basketball instruction at the beginning of Five Star, right? And then it kind of blossoms from there. And PRC mentions this list of, great coaches that come out of the high school ranks, right? And it's just fascinating to think that the camp probably would not have gotten off the ground if it wasn't for a guy by the name of Hubie Brown, who was the head coach at Fairlawn High School in New Jersey, who helped in terms of the recruitment of players and getting, Garf these registrations that he needed to run the camp. And Garf said, when he saw Hubie lecture, he knew that he was just much more than a high school coach, that his potential was through the roof. And that was another one of his talents, not just scouring to find, the greatest players, but to identify these coaches at an early stage before they had even got into the college ranks, right? So Mike Fratello was a JV football coach.
Incredible.
When he got lured to 5-star,
Crazy.
right? Dick Vitale was a high school coach in New Jersey.
Was still bald.
Yeah, no kidding. He's like the only one that still doesn't look young in those pictures.
Unbelievable.
Yep. And the Bookazine tells a great kind of story through John Calipari's own words of his journey through basketball, which began at 5-star. So without 5-star, he doesn't get a scholarship to the University of North Carolina, Wilmington, coming out of high school. Just one day by chance in the summer, because the camp was held about 5 minutes away from where he lived in Robert Morris College near Pittsburgh. His mother and his aunt worked in the cafeteria at the college. So he stops by there one day just to hang out. And he's sitting in the stands, right? He's in college now, and Garf recognizes him and says, "Hey, kid, what are you doing here?" "I just came to hang out." "Well, I got a coach that flaked on me. I need you to teach a station for me." And up until that point, Cal said his major goal was to be a high school teacher and a high school basketball coach.
Yeah.
But when he got on that stage, he realized that, hey, maybe I can do more. And it was through that interconnected web of Garfs that Cal gets his first break, because Garf calls up his guy by the name of Larry Brown, who's at the University of Kansas, who, by the way, Garf recruited to play on his AAU team when Larry Brown was in high school. He recruited him to play for the Nationals team.
I love that.
So that's how far it goes back. And he calls up Larry Brown and says, "Hey, you got to put this kid on your staff."
Yeah.
And so that's the beginning of Coach Calipari.
That's so crazy. And that interconnectedness, you're right back to that theme that you can see. I'm not even going to go into the dream team thing, but there's another thing talking about how all the connections there. But you mentioned the Godfather in Indiana, which is Bob Knight, but there's a Godfather at 5-star too, and I was going to bring it back to you, Ali, to talk a little bit about the Godfather at the camp, because that's a story I didn't know. You know, I brought up 5-star to my nephews in high school and was shocked when he didn't know about it. So I'm pumped to give him this for Christmas, and he's got some basketball homework from me. But this guy I didn't really know about, and he played such a integral role to scouting in college basketball. I'm talking about Tom. Sorry, Tom Konchalski.
Yeah, Tom Konchalski, right? And just another fascinating person within the fabric of the great unfolding of the modern game. And, these guys kind of started out as bitter enemies, because Tom Konchalski was good friends with Mr. Steinberg, who ran the rival AAU team, right? The New York Gems. So you think about kind of the rivalry between the Bad Boy Pistons and the Chicago Bulls, right? Or if you take it back to New York City AAU lore, the Riverside Church Hawks against the Bronx Gauchos. The Gems and the Nationals were bitter rivals. They competed against one another. They poached each other's team for talent. And Konchalski was a friend of Steinberg, who helped him with the Gems program, right? But eventually, him and Garfinkel realized that they are kindred spirits. And he plays a fascinating role in the development of scouting. He's a fixture at 5-star who helped build the camp. And he's just this person who is a legendary figure in high school gyms around the country that people have called the last honest man in the gym. So that's another great chapter for people who love basketball, who are interested in the history and not just the usual cast of characters that people talk about. He is, again, part of that legacy of one of the great architects that helped elevate the game to the level what we see today.
I'll tell you what, I love that. And I'll tell you a story from today. I was reading it and I had to Google a couple of the words in there. So you write so well. I had to look up a couple of words, and it tells a story in such a fun way when you read it. The words jump off the page and make it come alive. That's such a great opportunity to have. Just to appreciate your work on that. I also appreciate you guys coming on today. We got a couple more questions. I'm going to throw the next one to PRC. I've got a half-baked idea here that I stole and just kind of want to get your take on it. So in 1989, Garfunkel and Five Star embraced developing a different side of the basketball talent. They start doing, bring Bill Rafferty in. They've got 100 aspiring broadcasters and have a broadcasting role with JDS Sports and all the cool stuff you guys are doing. Is there any chance you guys are going to bring something like that back? And if so, where do I sign up?
Hey, can we go for free?
Scott, I will work in the cafeteria.
Well, I'll put it this way. It was before my time at Five Star. I've become dear friends with Billy Raftery Jr., who grew up at the camp. He actually got a, offer to play at Columbia University here in New York City, but I think he gave up hoops after a year. He's now in the production business in Hollywood. He lives out in Malibu, but he always jokes like that was like a one and done in a bad way. The business of the broadcasting school at Five Star flamed out pretty quickly. And, I think the intent and spirit of what they were trying to create was definitely there, and giving kids an opportunity and platform to call games and obviously learn by doing. Yeah. But the business of it, apparently, and I don't know where it went wrong, but I used to hear Garf and them joke about it. Like every time Bill Sr. and Garf would see each other, they'd talk about the broadcasting school. So it lives on in infamy.
Maybe Garf was in charge of that instead of Will.
JDS would not invest in it.
Well, towards the end of the magazine, you guys write a little article about the future, and PRC and Karl, this is more for you guys. I know you guys did the camp in 2019, and then it got canceled again because of COVID this year. Plans, if you guys just want to give me a few minutes on the future, and I know that there's a lot of ways you can go with that, and I just want to give you guys the floor to tell us what the future of Five Star is now as it currently sits.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, we always want to stay true to our mission, which is to teach the game of basketball. So camps and clinics will always be front and center. And this year's camp, we actually didn't cancel it. We just pivoted it to a virtual camp with the MBPA.
Yep.
Nice.
Shortened it a little bit just because kids were dribbling in their kitchens, which gets kind of awkward after 3 days. But nonetheless, we always stand for teaching. Five Star, that's been its backbone from day one. Having, teaching stations were literally formed at the camp by Bob Knight. So that comes first and foremost. We're actually going to be doing that a lot at a new home base in Brooklyn at the brandly new renovated Bedford Armory, which has been, we'll have 3 full courts, 2 high school college regulation and 1 NBA regulation court. And it'll consist of really 3 things, quarterly basketball clinics that we usually will pop up on a day off when there's no school. We'll do our probably 1 to 2 summer sessions. Five Star's tried and true basketball camp format, 4 days of high intensity instruction and competing against top talent. And then we're working on what's called a development league. That'll be a 10-week program once in the fall and then again in the spring. That is a progressive skill development. So 6 weeks of skills and drills, all theme based. And then week 7 to 10 will be, competition format where you break into teams, take what you've learned during the skills and drills, right, and stations, and applying those in game situations. And so it'll culminate with the quarterfinals, semifinals, and finals, just because everyone wants to compete and win, and it's fun. So that's first and foremost. Second is, we really believe, Karl and I and Joe, our chairman, in giving back to the game of basketball. It's done a lot of good for us personally, and Five Star specifically. So we partnered with Project Backboard in doing court refurbishments, and we committed to doing 10 of these over the next 10 years. Our first one was in Brooklyn in partnership with Kevin Durant. It came out really well. And we have one right now in production, literally should be done in the next 10 days, in partnership with Bill Walton in San Diego, who wants to honor his first basketball coach and pay tribute to him. So with COVID, we'll probably unveil that with a plaque ceremony for his coach in March and plan to be there on the ground. And then third is content, right? We, having Slam and 5-Star in our portfolio. We're big believers in storytelling. That's where this Bookazine was born. It's one way to tell the story. But we're also working, and I can't reveal too much info, but working on a podcast narrative, as I hinted at earlier, to tell the full story of 5-Star in audio format, leveraging the archives that Karl brought up earlier, but also first-person interviews that we're doing with all the folks that made 5-Star what it became today. It's just another way to tell this rich story in the full tapestry of 5-Star basketball. So those are the three core pillars going forward. And Karl spends a lot of his day-to-day actually running the community management and publishing the social content and working with 19.9 to bring a merch capsule collection to life. So there's always a lot going on. With
just went in the other room and saw the full layout there. It looked incredible. So that's exciting. And that shirt is absolutely iconic. I was even going through the magazine today and looking for other things that Barnett needs to help bring back to life. I saw like a windbreaker, and I want the HSBI little logo, Garf's like glasses logo. I was like, oh, everything. Give it all to me.
We can probably make that happen.
An orange white classic shirt, because there was no chance I was making that All-Star game when I was there.
But nobody knows that when you wear ours around now, you can make up any story you want to make up.
And I do.
Well, we want to just thank you guys again for sitting down and taking the time to talk to us. We had a lot of fun with this. I think that the next time we all get together should be in Joe's attic, so we can go through all those archives together. So if you guys if you guys can set that up for us, we would be greatly appreciative. So
just one final thing, man. When you go through those archives and you see those papers that have coffee stains and they still smell like Garf cigarette smoke, you're gonna have an out of body experience.
I bet.
I'm here for it, man. I'm here for it.
Definitely.
Karl and I were there in July, sweating, trying to find it's up in the attic. There's no AC up that way, and we were just sweating for an hour trying to find that original camp flyer.
I bet. And then you didn't turn it into a poster.
And then we failed on you.
Well, photocopy it for you.
Exactly.
Later.
Well, guys, we appreciate it, man. Thank you all for taking the time.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you for listening to the 19.9 podcast with HVS, the High Volume Shooters. For more information, check out the blog at 19.9.com under HVS. And while you're there, do yourself a favor and pick up some retro college shorts. Till next time.